It's killing over 60,000 people a year, and Americans are now more likely to die from an accidental opioid overdose than in a car crash.
Joe Biden has no interest in securing our southern border. He has no interest in keeping this country safe.
I want that to happen to anybody else. I'm devastated, I'm heartbroken, I'm shattered.
Let's discuss this crazy border situation unfolding down in the United States. This is some really heavy stuff going on that could massively impact the upcoming 2024 election. So let's break it all down. President Biden is preparing to sign a major executive order addressing immigration rules and border security protocols with Mexico. On the surface, it seems like a reasonable move for a president to make some reforms in this very aggressive policy arena, right? But here's where things get a bit tricky and controversial. There's a growing outcry from citizens, law enforcement officials, and even some politicians that Biden's planned order doesn't go nearly far enough in truly shutting down the lawless, out-of-control crisis happening along the southern border with Mexico.
You want to talk about a country in decline? You have the cartels controlling a lot of part of your southern border.
The main accusation is that while Biden claims to be working on securing the border, his policies actually leave way too many gaps and vulnerabilities that allow violent Mexican drug cartels to basically walk right across and smuggle their goods into the United States like it's no big deal. To understand where these critics are coming from, we've got to examine the startling facts about what's actually been going down at the border over the past couple of years under Biden's leadership. We're talking mind-blowing statistics that make it seem like border security is essentially non-existent. So let's get into it. Get this, in the 2022 fiscal year alone, U.S. Border Patrol reportedly caught and apprehended over 2.3 million migrants illegally crossing into the country from Mexico. It's a pretty scary figure. Over 2.3 million illegal border crossers were stopped by agents in just 1 year. That shattered all previous annual records by a long shot. But here's the even crazier part that really gets people as riled up as they are. Those 2.3 million migrants were only the ones Border Patrol managed to actually detain and process into custody. Credible estimates indicate that there were over 600,000 additional illegal border crossers, which were later dubbed gotaways, who managed to evade capture completely and just disappear into American communities, never to be seen again. Think about that for a second. Well, over 2.9 million individual illegal entries across the southern border occurred just last year. That's more people invading than the entire population of the state of Nevada. It's an uncontrolled mass violation of national sovereignty happening right under Biden's watch.
The border wall was nearing completion and we were actually enforcing court-ordered deportation. But by the evening of that very same day, Joe Biden had reversed these policies and thus began the greatest illegal mass migration in history.
Yet despite these jaw-dropping numbers that clearly scream crisis, the Biden administration has been accused by critics of being totally unable or even flat out unwilling to produce any effective systems to finally shut down these trafficking pipelines from Mexico.
Entirely preventable and tragic violent crimes are reported almost daily. Violent criminal gangs and international crime cartels are now operating in our cities, and sanctuary policies protect these criminals from deportation and, in many cases, from even detention.
But the chaos doesn't just stop at illegal immigration. The madness of the open border is enabling some seriously deadly activities by these powerful Mexican cartels too.
Hospitals are forced to provide billions of dollars of uncompensated care. Fatal drugs like fentanyl are now flooding our streets.
We're, of course, talking specifically about the fentanyl poisoning epidemic that's claimed tens of thousands of American lives, and it's sadly primarily teenagers and young adults who are affected.
People need to be aware that, your child doesn't have to be a, drug user in order for this to, take their life. They can literally try it once, and from what I understand, my daughter didn't even consume an entire pill, and she's no longer here.
Fentanyl is essentially an ultra-potent synthetic opioid estimated to be 100 times stronger than morphine. Just a few tiny milligrams can end your life by shutting down your respiratory system within an hour of exposure.
Que se expandió como una pandemia. O sea, empezó a haber gente muerta por aquí, por allá.
Yet these criminal gangs have started mass-producing fentanyl powder and pills by the literal ton using chemicals sourced from their Asian connections. They then utilize their well-established drug trafficking routes to smuggle it all across the border, concealed in vehicles, human mules, and whatever they can to avoid detection. The final products hit American streets in the form of counterfeit pills manufactured by the cartels with fentanyl as the main ingredient, but designed to mimic legitimate pharmaceuticals like oxycodone, Xanax, Adderall, you name it. So these street dealers and young recreational users have absolutely no idea they're actually buying straight-up poison produced in Mexican super labs. Last year alone, over 70,000 Americans suffered completely preventable fatal overdoses after taking a couple of what they thought were standard recreational pharmaceuticals like Oxys or Xannies, but were actually laced with lethal fentanyl doses.
It's killing over 60,000 people a year, and Americans are now more likely to die from an accidental opioid overdose than in a car crash.
The victims are kids from middle-class suburbs, college kids just trying to get through finals, and teenagers recklessly experimenting.
It's like you either through a friend or you get a contact from someone else, word spreads through the grapevine. I mean, it really becomes accessible anywhere you go.
Whole families and communities have been torn apart by these poisonings, facilitated through the cartel's pipeline, extending from Mexican production all the way into American neighborhoods.
I know he made a mistake. He made a big mistake that cost him his life.
These tragic testimonies are a clear indicator that this current crisis won't just stop on its own. Yet critics argue the Biden administration is still not effectively disrupting or dismantling these narco-trafficking operations staged across the passable southern border, at least not to the levels demanded by the catastrophic loss of life happening in American cities and towns. So many people worry the border chaos will only continue spiraling out of control if Biden doesn't implement drastically stronger enforcement measures through this new executive order. You've got to remember, those 2.3 million apprehended illegal crossings in 2022 were actually down from over 2.7 million in 2021, with border security policies still seeming so lax and unserious. Critics argue there's no deterrent or obstacles left to prevent even higher numbers of illegal crossings and fentanyl smuggling from occurring in 2023 and 2024 as migrants and cartels sense an open door. But now, let's dive into the actual policy responses Biden is supposedly cooking up in response to these relentless assaults on border integrity. Let's break down what he's putting on the table and why various detractors from all sides feel it's either too much or nowhere near enough. One of Biden's core moves is revoke the controversial Remain in Mexico policy from the Trump era that requires certain non-Mexican migrants to wait on the other side of the border while their asylum cases get examined. In practice, this policy has led to out-of-control migrant camps housing tens of thousands of people for months on end in northern Mexican border towns like Matamoros. It's created a massive humanitarian crisis on the other side of the border as these shanty camps rapidly deplete the modest resources of towns unprepared to host them.
In these makeshift camps, Border Patrol was not letting people leave, but they were also not providing food, they were not providing water, they were not providing medical care.
¿Y cuánta gente duerme allí? Mis 2 hijos y yo. O sea que 3 personas.
At the same time, while this is all happening, Biden has proposed establishing legal pathways for immigrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela to enter the United States temporarily with work permits for up to 2 years if they can get American-based sponsors and pass background checks. On one hand, this is intended to create an orderly, regulated process for economic migrants from those nations to seek opportunities legally rather than paying smugglers thousands to sneak across the desert. But critics have been complaining that these new pathways could actually increase the flow of migrants, as more of them will eventually sense the opportunities for legal status when they arrive at the border.
If this is a convicted murderer who's escaped Venezuela, you don't have that information available to you.
Do not have that
I assume you
information.
turn them over to the Border Patrol. What does the Border Patrol do with them?
And that's what we would try to do, would be to contact them to help us.
The administration is also calling for allowing trained asylum officers to fully remove some migrants at the border through expedited removal, rather than putting them through the overwhelmed asylum courts. The idea would be to weed out migrants deemed inadmissible quickly, rather than processing everyone through the backlog system. But immigration advocates argue that this is a ruthless violation of human rights and diminishing hard-won asylum protections.
We feel like it's a very problematic move that's based more in politics than what the actual needs are of the community and really what needs to happen around immigration right now.
And, perhaps most controversially of all, some reports are even saying that Biden may move to implement some form of sweeping executive action to allow millions of undocumented immigrants currently living in the U.S. to come out of the shadows with legal work status and potential pathways to full citizenship somewhere down the line.
Is he doing it now? I think that it's very simple. It's one word, and it's politics. It's Joe Biden has no interest in securing our southern border. He has no interest in keeping this country safe.
The White House seems to view this as killing two birds with one stone, satisfying the demands from pro-immigrant activists for amnesty and legal status, while also removing future incentives for illegal border crossing. If more people can arrive through official ports of entry, instead of finding illegal ways of getting in all on their own. But a lot of people are now saying that this is a blatant violation of the already existing immigration laws. Not only that, but they're also saying this would trigger a massive wave of backlash and legal disputes that the already overwhelmed U.S. Department of Homeland Security simply can't handle.
Had no interest in securing the border. And quite frankly, this all started when Joe Biden rescinded the policies of Donald Trump. That's where this began. He has set records along the southern border, and they are not ones that we should be proud of.
And while that's going on, others also speculated that Biden could attempt to sell some more aggressive policies, like reviving the construction of a physical border wall or imposing stricter criminal penalties for illegal entry. It's not the first time he's done so either, but these also provoke strong opposition from pro-immigrant activists who view physical barriers as nothing more than a cruel, inhumane overreaction to what can otherwise be fixed through more humane means.
People are going to continue to be stuck in these very dangerous areas in Mexico, these border areas that we know are totally controlled by organized crime and are putting at people not only at the dangers of trying to cross the border, but also they have been exposed to serious human rights abuses such as kidnapping, killing, and many other things.
So essentially, Biden finds himself caught in a tricky dance between the relaxed open borders policies progressives demand and the hardline immigration crackdowns that his critics are saying are the only real way to regain control over the situation at the border. That being said, Biden sure does have one incredibly tough decision to make, and whichever lane he ends up picking, it's bound to upset a lot of people. So now that we've explored what these next few days will be about, let's move on and examine some of the more fiery proposals floating around from Biden's opposition, which could have some exploding impacts on U.S. relations with Mexico itself. We're, of course, talking about the increasingly loud voices coming from Republican figures like former President Donald Trump, who believe the cartels fueling this entire border meltdown must be battered into submission through aggressive U.S. military force, potentially even beyond Mexico's borders, if they fail to cooperate. Apparently, Trump himself has talked about forming kill squads or elite special operations teams to conduct cross-border strikes, eliminating high-value targets sitting at the very top of these cartel hierarchies.
We can't have a war with Mexico.
No, it's a war on cartels. Mexico's petrified of the cartel.
The idea would be that by taking out kingpins like El Mencho, for instance, the man who runs the Jalisco New Generation cartel, through methods such as illegal hits or targeted raids, you'd sever the head of the snakes poisoning America with fentanyl and destabilizing border security. Well, at least temporarily, that is, since history has shown us time and time again that defeating one kingpin is really not that big of a deal as far as cartel operations go. You see, these These guys aren't just petty criminals who just so happen to be in power right now. They're more calculated and even more creative than one can imagine. And you have to look no further than the Sinaloa cartel to realize that getting rid of one leader will sometimes get you into even more trouble than before. The extradition of El Chapo to the United States was praised as a monumental victory at the time.
The world's most wanted narco looked confused, overwhelmed even, asking the DEA agent, "Where am I?" "Nueva York," they told him. His face says it all. The most powerful drug lord ever to live, reduced to tears in the hands of U.S. federal agents.
We're talking about a man who ruled over the Sinaloa cartel for the better part of 2 agonizing decades. So when he was captured and flown straight into a U.S. prison where he'd no longer be able to cause any more harm, people were finally seeing the light at the end of this tunnel. Little did they know, things were about to get a whole lot worse. Just as soon as El Chapo fell, his sons, the Los Chapitos, came right in and took over the organization.
Mexico is experiencing a sharp rise in violence. Some of the most notable examples in recent weeks include a series of roadside bombs in the state of Jalisco that left 4 police officers dead.
The Chapitos pioneered the manufacture and trafficking of the deadliest drug our country has ever faced. And they are responsible for the massive influx of fentanyl into the United States.
It is a disturbing trend we've seen. Fentanyl deaths have skyrocketed in recent years, and 2 years ago this week, 3 people in New York City died from an overdose of the drug.
So, now that we know just how dire the situation really is, it's pretty easy to see why some might be calling for drastic measures. And Trump isn't alone in pondering these types of militarized solutions to the cartel chaos either. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has vowed to launch cross-border military operations into Mexico on day 1 if elected president in 2024, no permission needed.
Would you support that kind of American military use?
Yes, and I will do it on day 1. Here's the thing. The cartels are killing tens of thousands of our fellow citizens. You want to talk about a country in decline? You have the cartels controlling a lot of part of your southern border.
It seems pretty clear that DeSantis is pretty serious about this issue. And if you're still not convinced, he's even been selling t-shirts that hint at leaving the Mexican drug lords stone cold dead. In 2022, Republican Senators Lindsey Graham and John Kennedy tried pushing legislation that would explicitly authorize the U.S. military to pursue cartel members and associates located inside of Mexico's own sovereign territory. This prompted outrage from Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who blasted the proposal as an incredibly offensive proposal. It risks sparking international tensions or even outright military conflict between these 2 historically friendly neighbors.
El señor legislador, sí, es un irrespetuoso. Nosotros somos un país independiente, libre, soberano. No somos colonia. No somos protectorado de ningún país extranjero.
In fact, most conventional military and diplomatic experts claim that heavy-handed U.S. interventions or prolonged occupations in Mexico would likely cause more problems than solutions in the long run, while destabilizing the entire region. Even figures like former Joint Chiefs Chairman Mark Milley, who advocated for firm military action to defend the homeland from terrorist threats after the events that unfolded back in 2001, have described a potential invasion of Mexico as unwise and a bad idea. But you can't deny the frustration driving rhetoric like Trump's and DeSantis's. After all, after 2 years of the border situation visibly deteriorating into complete lawlessness and humanitarian trauma on Biden's watch, many Americans are demanding far more forceful action than the incremental responses offered so far. And the opioid overdose crisis, fueled by fentanyl trafficking, has progressed so alarmingly that entire towns have had to start stocking emergency naloxone, a drug that reversed the overdose to combat the constant poisonings. Nonprofits distribute fentanyl test strips to nightclubs and street corners so drug users can test their supplies before ingesting.
This increase in narcotics trafficking is not only causing loss of life, but also a huge strain on our criminal justice system, driving our crime numbers and placing extreme pressures on jail capacity, addiction services, and mental health services, which in most cases we already lack.
After years of policy drift and denial from the Biden administration, it's no wonder voices like Trump's promising decisive military action against the cartels staging this whole crisis are starting to gain purchase. That being said, despite some intense political back and forth, all hope is not yet lost for Biden to change the narrative. But he'll need to unveil far more visionary proposals that properly match the extreme scale of the border emergency at hand. It's the tried and true Trump playbook that proved galvanizing in 2016 and could be even more persuasive with fentanyl deaths as a new lightning rod. What could a true secure the border action plan even look like from the Biden administration at this late stage? Clearly, traditional congressional legislation is off the table, with the two parties irreconcilably divided on any immigration compromise. On the domestic front, Biden could probably get away with resuming many of Trump's more heavy-handed policies through executive order, like restarting border wall construction, imposing stricter detention and deportation protocols, narrowing asylum eligibility, and more. But this invites immediate court challenges and could spark a humanitarian backlash. A more creative route may be aggressively expanding legal migrant worker and skilled visa programs for key industries like agriculture. But good luck getting the GOP to cooperate or even getting immigration advocates on board with anything appearing to be a compromise.
To divert our resources on a local level to combat something that is already within the infrastructure of our federal law is incredibly problematic and a logistical nightmare.
Where Biden may find more wiggle room, however, is on structuring new bilateral security and migration management agreements with Mexico itself. That could be an easier pill for Biden's critics to swallow than amnesty if pitched as Mexico finally securing their side of the equation, especially if some sort of exemptions allow U.S. special operations deployments or embeds alongside Mexican forces targeting the cartel leadership. Simultaneous U.S. economic and anti-corruption initiatives could be folded in, addressing root causes like poverty and lawlessness. It would represent a complete multilateral effort to finally re-establish collaborative border and regional security protocols with partners who have a mutual stake in solving this crisis. But getting Mexico bought into such strong security cooperation may require aggressive American negotiating and investment. But regardless of which solution Biden ends up pursuing, one thing is clear: the current reactive, half-measure band-aids applied over the ever-worsening border situation are getting more and more ineffective as time goes on. Fans of more drastic measures, however, are demanding militarized crackdowns, followed by enhanced security, even if it invites backlash. All that's left is for Biden to attempt being the bold unifier he sold himself as, assembling a truly visionary, comprehensive strategy that balances often contradictory concerns around immigrant rights, drug enforcement, national sovereignty, and humane immigration management. No pressure, right? Just the immigration powder keg that threatens to become an all-consuming political wildfire if mishandled much longer. By now, you should have a pretty comprehensive overview of where we're at with Biden's border and immigration policies leading into 2024. The increasingly radicalized solutions are being tossed around from all sides of this volatile debate, and most importantly, you can see why so many people are deeply skeptical, even scornful, of the Biden administration's current piecemeal border and immigration reform proposals in light of the objective realities and deteriorating trends. At a certain point, more forceful, decisive action becomes not just expected, but essentially mandated if Biden hopes to preserve any credibility on this paramount issue. Whether that decisive action ultimately leans towards prioritizing humanitarian through legalization programs and open migration pathways, or swings in the complete opposite direction prioritizing militarized deterrence and security at all costs, is likely the most important policy decision he'll have to make in his presidency. Make the wrong choice and risk either a humanitarian catastrophe of ramped-up deportations and aggressive military interventions, or the unpredictable blowback of being seen as weak by some of the most brutal organizations on the planet. Thanks for watching. So what do you think Biden should do to resolve the border crisis? Militarize the border, create more legal immigration pathways, or something else? Feel free to tell us your opinions in the comment section below. And if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Until next time, stay safe.